Well, hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Capturing Christianity. I am Cameron Bertuzzi, and today I am joined by Dr. Cy Garte, who is a retired biochemist, and he is joining me to do a Q&A with you. If you have any question for Dr. Garte on anything related to God and science, that's the topic for today's live stream, then make sure to leave it in the live chat, and we'll get to it as quickly as possible. Part of the reason why we're doing this is because Dr. Garte and I did a interview together, an in-person interview that is reaching about 1 million views, and I think it's going to surpass 1 million views. It might even become our most viewed video on this channel, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity to give you guys an opportunity to ask him any of your questions that you have. So if you've got a question for Dr. Garte, leave it in the live chat right now. I'll keep an eye on it, and we've already got the first one come in by a guy named Old Things. Let's see if we can pull it up on the screen here. Old things pass away, all things become new. Thanks for your super chat. Just to jump right in, Dr. Garte, I respect your conversion from atheism to Christianity and the many miraculous things along the way. My question is, how do you see / make sense of the natural compared to the supernatural?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, many people make a very fine, or I should say, a very firm line between natural and supernatural. So, the standard definition is natural is anything that we can access scientifically. The supernatural is beyond that by definition. But I have a slightly different take on it, which is that I think that the line between natural and supernatural is constantly changing as our science changes. So the way I like to put it is if we were having this discussion, of course it wouldn't be online, but if we were having this discussion in 1880, and I told you that time varies depending on how fast you go. So if you go really, really fast, time really slows down. You would say, well, that's nonsense, and it sounds like supernatural, magical nonsense. But it's true. It might have been supernatural. We would probably think of that and many other things that we've discovered in physics in the last 100 years. We would think of that as supernatural back then. And now, of course, we know that the speed of light being constant and time being variable is a natural, true fact of science. The same would be true for, things like quantum superposition and many other things that have become known in science, but that would have been considered supernatural. You can even take that to the point of, going back a little further and using any of our current technology. For example, what I'm doing right now, talking to a bunch of people I don't know, on a screen. That would have been considered supernatural if you tried to describe it to somebody, a few hundred years ago. So it changes. And that's very important to know, because things that we now consider to be supernatural, many of them may turn out to be not, or at least on the border. Now, I think there is a supernatural that will not ever become, move into the realm of the natural. And that includes, for example, God, the kingdom of heaven, things which just don't fit in any way I can imagine into a natural world, into something that could be approachable by science. But I would be very cautious about saying exactly where that boundary is, because, as I said, it shifts all the time, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, this raises a question that I've thought about this question a lot, and I just don't like the term supernatural. I don't even like the term natural. I think that this distinction between the two is a little bit too fuzzy. It's not all that clear. And then when people define the terms in the way that they mean, there's usually issues that you can pick out with each of those definitions. So I just tend to I don't like that, because, as you say, some of the things that we considered natural or supernatural, we no longer consider those natural or supernatural anymore. And that to me is a really serious problem with this distinction, if we can just sort of arbitrarily pick things and put it in a category. And then another issue with this distinction is that right now the term supernatural is almost used as a pejorative. It's almost used as if it's like, a nasty term or nasty word, and it's like people who believe in the supernatural are just silly morons, silly idiots, and I just don't like the term. I don't think it's helpful. I think that it has bad connotations, and it's just I think we should move away from using the term altogether. That's my view, and I'm coming at this more of a philosophical perspective. But if you have
No,
any
I
thoughts,
think
feel free to share on that.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm coming at it from a scientist's viewpoint, which is that we only study the natural. We don't try to study the supernatural because we have no tools to do so. Uh, but then when we do get a tool that we can use to study what is maybe considered by people to be supernatural, that thing becomes natural because by definition we can study it. So that's why that border is so fuzzy. And in terms of pejorative, I agree, and I think that's a consequence of the terrible prevalence of scientism that exists, in the world, in the intellectual
Mm-hmm.
universe today. That science is the only way to find out is the only valid epistemology. It's the only way to find out any truth, and scientists know that that's not true. I mean, that's it's clearly not the case. So anything that can't be studied by science is called supernatural, and as you said, has a pejorative meaning because it's not science or amenable to science. And that's a mistake. And I agree. I think it would be great if we dropped that term. I agree.
All right, let's move on to a new question from Slam RN, one of our moderators. She says, thanks for your super chat, first of all. She says, are you working on a new book? If so, what is it going to be about? Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, that's a great question because the answer is yes. It's even more than that. The book has been accepted by my publisher. I'm in the process right now, as we speak, of finishing a draft, which is due in about a month. So I'm pretty busy, and so is my wife, who's helping me with the editing. And what it's about, it is. I will tell you that it is tentatively titled. The working title is Harmony: The Relationship Between Science and Faith, and it's very broad, covers a lot of topics. I'm not sure the format yet. That'll be discussions with development editor, etc. But it is on the way, and I just say if anybody wants to know more about progress there and what else I'm doing, if you look at my website, which is very easy, cygart.com, and you subscribe to my newsletter, I update that roughly once a month, not more than that, but around once a month. I send out a newsletter which will describe the progress on the book and other things that are going on. So that's a good way to keep posted on that.
Awesome. And I've got his website linked in the description of this video for your convenience. If you're interested in visiting the website and also purchasing his books, you can do that from his website as well. All right, Venerage, he says, what is your view on the role of angels and demons? Interesting question.
It's a very interesting question, especially because Cameron mentioned before that, if that interview that we did keeps gaining viewers, we may actually surpass the #1 video on his channel on Capturing Christianity. And that video happens to be that most popular video happens to be an interview with an exorcist who talked about the role of demons. And, I have to admit that angels and demons never quite got into my theology. When I became a Christian, I really had a hard time sort of accepting that. It sounded a little bit too much like polytheism to me. But after listening to that interview, and about the reality of demons, which of course are mentioned in many times in the Gospels, I started thinking, well, I don't know, maybe I have to think about this. So I don't have a set opinion on it. It's sort of in the realm of theology, which is over my head. Let's put it that way. I'm not, I tend not to think that demons are real, but that may not be true. and I could be corrected. In terms of angels, that's an interesting question because, you know, there are lots of definitions of angels. What's an angel, and who are they, and do they ever appear on Earth? And I would say that I perhaps had some experiences where maybe I thought somebody might be an angel. But again, I really can't give a detailed answer to that. It's out of my league, out of my wheelhouse. I guess that's that's the expression.
Yeah, angels and demons. One thing that kind of keeps me like from fully embracing their reality as a Christian is that there's something in the cognitive science of religion called the hyperactive agency detection device, something like that, HAAD. And basically what that is that we are sort of programmed evolutionarily to intuit or infer that there's agency in places where there isn't agency. And that is that's one of the reasons why they suggest that religious belief is sort of ingrained in us, these cognitive scientists of religion. So if we take this hyperactive agency detection device and we apply that to angels and demons, then we can see that like sometimes we infer that there's agency in places where there actually isn't. And this was evolutionarily advantageous, as I mentioned. Right. So that because we have these sort of false positives that can happen, that can occur, and so I'm a little bit skeptical. I want to make sure that I'm not going overboard. I'm not just acquiescing to this hyperactive agency detection device that's going on in my brain, you know. And so I want to be sensitive to that. I don't want to just infer demons or angels or these sort of invisible spirits. I don't want to just go along with these intuitions that I might have. Now that said, as you mentioned, that interview with Father Vincent, with Father, what is, I think it's Vincent, but I can't remember his other name. Lampert, Vincent Lampert. I mean, that interview was quite compelling, and it does like at least raise some questions. It's like, how do you actually explain what was going on in these situations? And another thing that I really liked about what he was saying is that as exorcists, what they do is they submit like their patients that come to them, and they have, you know, thousands of requests every year for people who think that they're demon possessed, and they have like strict guidelines on the sort of criteria that have to be met in order to qualify someone as demon possessed. And so what they do is they send most of these people or all of these people to have like a psychiatric evaluation to make sure that it's not some sort of psychological issue. And then only if the psychologist in question is like, yeah, there's like, psychologically, there's nothing wrong with them. There's something else going on here. Then only at that point do they then infer that there is some sort of like demonic presence that needs to be eradicated. And so I appreciate that they do that. And so, I mean, and if you just listen to the stories, then it does like create a very compelling, I mean, it's a very compelling account of demons. And so it does at least open the possibility. And I mean, as a Christian, like I'm already open to it. The question is, are they real, you know? And so I'm completely open to the evidence. I'm just sort of not necessarily persuaded either way. But I would say I probably land on the side of, yeah, they're probably real. Yeah, there's probably something else going on, but I could be persuaded the other way. I feel like I went for a while, but do you have any thoughts on that before we move on to the next question?
No, I think I'm pretty much in agreement, except I probably lean a little bit more to the side of, no, skepticism. I don't think so. Skepticism, yeah. I'm also somewhat skeptical about this HAAD, although I've heard about it. And that really comes, I mean, I don't think it's impossible. It makes sense. It's logical. But I'm a little bit cautious in general about the whole field of evolutionary psychology, and that we evolved all of our behaviors the way we evolved everything else. You got to prove it to me before I'm going to believe it.
Well, it is one of the most accepted views, I think, in the cognitive science of religion. So it's a pretty standard.
Well accepted, right? But of course, I'm not a cognitive scientist, so.
Right. Neither am I. Neither am I. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to another question. All right. So this one is related to another question that was asked earlier about the supernatural natural distinction. He says, rewind, truth seeker. Things we have described as supernatural are now explained by natural. What has ever been explained as natural but is now explained as supernatural? It seems the change is only, and he made a mistake here, the change is always from supernatural to natural. So what he's asking is, has there been something that we thought was natural and then we came to believe was supernatural? I mean, I'll go ahead and start with an answer to this, is that the distinction is garbage. We need to get away from the distinction, because if you, like, imagine asking this question without being able to use these terms. How do you do it? It's almost like, how do you actually ask this question without using these labels? It's very, very difficult to do that. And I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult if it's a good distinction. So, yeah, anyways, what are your thoughts on it? Do you have any thoughts on this
Well, I mean, a lot of things have gone from natural to supernatural. There was a time when everyone believed, if again, it's a question of definition, but people would believe that, gods, plural, polytheistic gods were just as natural as anything else. They explained everything like thunder and, crops growing or not growing. It was part of nature. And that then entered the realm of the supernatural. But what this goes along with what you said, Cameron. The only reason, I mean, there was no distinction in ancient days. There was no natural and supernatural. The distinction was made when science began to realize that there were some things that could be studied and answered, and that became what was natural, and everything else, was not. So it's really a question that has to do with these definitions. And I think with the historical context, we can see that it's gone in both directions, and the border is fuzzy. And the more I think about this and hear Cameron talking, the more I agree that we really should drop the two terms. They have very little use.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually kind of got this from Josh Rasmussen, who is somewhat of our leader here on Capturing Christianity. He's our resident philosopher. He's also on our board, and he's just one of the most amazing people on the face of the planet. Let's move on to another question, and this one is related to angels and demons. We're getting a lot of questions on angels and demons today. How can a Christian explain heaven and angels to an atheist?
Well, that's a really tough question, because I don't know how a Christian can explain heaven and angels to anyone. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, I actually heard something from Dr. Craig about heaven, at least, that I found really interesting, and that was basically that there's already physical theories of the universe that say that, like, the universe could just suddenly wind up in a big crunch. So there was a big bang, but it could just suddenly collapse into a big crunch and then expand again, which would create a sort of new universe. And what he was suggesting is that there's already physical models of the universe where a new universe could sort of just come about naturalistically. And so his thought then was, well, why couldn't God do something along the same lines, where he just creates a new universe that has different laws of physics, which would, that would be what we call heaven. And so there's different laws that govern what goes on over there. And it just that doesn't seem too implausible. And I mean, the Bible does talk about a new heaven and a new earth. It's like it could be just a new universe that has different laws that govern it. That could be what heaven is like.
Well, it's sort of almost established science, although there's no proof for it. Can't be any proof for it. But the idea of a multiverse has been proposed, that there are many, huge numbers of universes, and that's used to explain, for example, things like fine tuning, because the idea would be that each of these universes operates under completely different laws than ours, and we just happen to be in the one that works, and that's why we're here. Now, there's no evidence for that, but it is something that comes out of string theory, and most physicists will say, yeah, it's a possibility. So I agree with what you said. In fact, I sometimes, in fact, I have something I'm writing now about something I call the duoverse. Maybe there are two universes, this one and heaven. And in heaven, there are no laws of nature. It's all up to God. God decides everything that happens. So that's why it can be all good. Nobody dies. We live forever. There's nothing but joy and love, etc. That all of that would not work in a universe with laws and regular patterns, but it could work if God's will was supreme and decided everything. It's very speculative, of course, and so is the multiverse. And so explaining is not the right term, because when you explain something, you're supposed to know what you're explaining. But this could be one way to say this is a possibility, but there's no way we will ever know that while we're in this universe.
Okay, now this next question is a purely theological question, so feel free to just say, well, I just don't know about that. But right. Basically, the question is, what is your view of rapture?
Yep, I definitely don't know about that.
Okay, yeah, because if you don't know this, Dr. Garte, he didn't grow up a Christian. He didn't grow up with all of these theological beliefs like instilled in him, and so he doesn't he's still doing his investigation into theology just the same as we are. He's more of a scientist. That is his background, and so the theological type questions, like, I mean, I struggle with them too, because I'm more of a philosophy guy. So I don't really have strong views on the rapture, other than I just don't see any reason to think that it's true. There's very little in the Bible that suggests that the rapture view is the correct view.
I mean, I'll just say I love the New Testament, with one exception, which is Revelation. I know it's a beautiful book, and I've read it, and I've read commentary on it by very smart people, and it's way over my head. I don't know if I'll ever understand any part of it. So end times and all of that is way beyond anything I can deal with.
All right, let's move on to... Let's move on to a question from Kevin O'Connor, who is, I believe he's an atheist, or maybe he's an agnostic. Kevin, if you're still here, then clarify that for me in the live chat. I'll make a correction. He says, question from your atheist. Oh, there he goes. From your atheist friend from New Jersey. Do you silo your religious beliefs entirely, i.e., none of your religious beliefs interact at all with the natural world?
Oh, no, absolutely not. My religious beliefs include the idea that God is present, that the Holy Spirit is with us, and guides us, that Jesus not only taught us how to live, but promised that, he stands with us at all times. So I think that my religious beliefs definitely interact with us as part of the natural world, as human beings. And again, the natural world, I'm beginning to feel more and more that Cameron's point is really right. This strong boundary between the natural world and religious beliefs is just has to be thrown out. Now, do I, for example, when I go into the lab, or I do some theoretical work, which is what I'm doing nowadays. I don't have a lab, but and I think about issues related to what I'm working on. Do I include my religious beliefs in that? No, I don't, because that's not appropriate in scientific work. And I continue to publish scientific papers in mainstream journals where I don't include my religious beliefs. It's something that is the convention not to do. Now, that wasn't always the case. If you go to my blog, my most recent post in my blog, which is called The Book of Works, is about a introduction to a physical chemistry textbook published in 1971, and physical chemistry is about as far as you can get from anything supernatural in the world of science. But the authors mention God, mention the Creator, which is amazing. That would never happen these days. So it's this this idea of complete divorce of one's religious beliefs from anything related to the natural world is sort of mythological. But again, I will say again, on the other hand, I don't bring them into my scientific investigations, and frankly, I don't know anyone who does, and I know many Christians who are scientists, and none of them do that. And I can say that unequivocally that none of them do that. It just doesn't work. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't implications and ramifications of the science that we do that bear on our beliefs. So, someone like Jennifer Wiseman, who's one of the great astronomers and also happens to be a friend of mine and a Christian, she does work with the Hubble Space Telescope, and she loves to present photos of the amazing majesty of God's creation, and she often quotes the Psalm, "The heavens proclaim the works of His hands," which is um, obvious if you look at these photos. Now, that doesn't mean that in any way affects or colors the way she uses her mathematical and scientific knowledge to make new discoveries. And that's true for all of us.
So Kevin actually has another question. I want to go ahead and jump to it now. He said, and this is related to the supernatural natural distinction. He says, "Yeah, I'm surprised that you want to do away with the natural non-natural distinction. Doesn't this mean that methodological naturalism should cover demons, prayers, etc.?" So let me just say something real quickly here about this too, because yeah, I mean, if we do away with the distinction, the natural, non-natural distinction, then you also got to do away with methodological naturalism, because naturalism is one of the terms that we're trying to do away with. Naturalism, like these terms are very unhelpful. So we would just not use that term either. We'd have to say methodological atheism, and in that case, yeah. So
well, look, the methodological naturalism is supposed to be a synonym for the scientific method, and the problem there is that the scientific method, just like the definition of naturalism, is continually changing. So the scientific method does have certain aspects which remain constant. There are certain rules that we ascribe to what is science, which has to do with reproducibility, clarity, a number of things. But again, those rules change. So, for example, one of the rules of science had been things that you come up with have to make sense. They have to be logical, reasonable, as well as reproducible and clear. But that again was thrown out the window when quantum mechanics and some aspects of relativity came around. They're not reasonable at all in the way we tend to think of reason as human beings. They defy logic. They defy everything we thought of as naturalistic science and reasonable ways of thinking. The same is going to be true in biology. We're almost there now. There are things in biology which just don't make sense. One thing that I always bring up is that, Occam's razor is a wonderful tool for finding truth in logic. It's useless in biology. It just doesn't work. The simplest explanation is almost never correct in biology. It's usually the most complex possible explanation that turns out to be right. So, methodological naturalism is a term that will be used to understand some things and not others. And there may be a time when we can apply the methods of science as they develop, not the methods today, but perhaps future methods of science will be able to apply to issues like, demons and things like that. I mean, we've done it already, and what the conclusion has been that demons, exist, but they're within individual brains, and they're based on diseases of the brain. But that may change. I mean, we don't know. We may find out more things that tell us, well, wait a minute, there's another thing going on here. And remember the key point: as soon as you are able to prove using any method of science that something is real or true, it automatically jumps into the world of nature, of naturalism. And so, that it's this amazing goalpost shifting, which goes on constantly. So it's really not a helpful term in any situation. I believe. I agree again with Cameron on that.
At this point, we should have Kevin on the show. He's got a follow up. He says, exactly my point, Dr. Garte. My point was that without the natural, non-natural distinction, science should cover demons, souls, etc. Do you think that one day science will cover that?
It's possible. It's possible. I don't know. If so nothing else, maybe to show that there's something else. I mean, some people, I've heard people say, well, demons are real. They're extraterrestrial aliens. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a falsifiable, provable hypothesis. If we're able to capture an extraterrestrial alien and looks and acts like a demon, okay, that's true. If not, well, then that part is not true. So we keep looking. So it may even be possible now. We'll see. Stay tuned.
Yeah, so there's a philosopher I mentioned on the channel a lot. His name is Trent Doherty. I've got his book actually right here. It's the Problem of Animal Pain. If you guys haven't read it, it's one of the best books on the problem of evil that I've ever read. And in fact, the reason why I have it out is because I plan on reading it again. Anyways, he's got this thesis, and I wanted to kind of get your thoughts. It's all related here. It's completely unrelated to the problem of evil type stuff, but the thesis is that the same exact type of reasoning that occurs in science is the same exact reasoning that occurs in theology. It's the same exact reasoning. I mean, you could just put it in terms of like abduction. It's the same exact type of thing. You come up with a theory, you come up with a doctrine, so to speak, that is going to explain the data, the scripture, and it's in the same way with the scientific hypothesis. You have a scientific hypothesis that is meant to explain the scientific data, the natural phenomena. And there I use the term, and I shouldn't be using the term, but you get what I mean. And so
I think
the question is,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that the same reasoning is in
that in the writing of N.T. Wright, some of the other theologians I've read? I haven't read a lot of theology, but in what I've read, I've seen that. And I've also seen it in some of the more popular books. Occasionally, people will propose a hypothesis, come up with evidence of various kinds, maybe even develop a theory. But certainly when it comes to things like understanding the Gospels, yes, absolutely.
It's not as if religious reasoning is like some completely different form of reasoning. It's the same.
Right.
It really is the same. So it depends on what we mean by science. I would say in response to Kevin, if we just mean reasoning more generally, that's one way to understand science. Is then it would cover that. It would cover. I mean, because it's just reasoning more generally, and if it is the same type of reasoning and religious reasoning and scientific reasoning, then yeah. I mean, why couldn't you reason about these things? Even though it may be a little bit more difficult, because when you introduce agency, there's always more questions that you've got to answer, right, and you've got to tighten up your hypotheses a little bit. Anyways, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, and I'm glad that we could get your response to it. Okay, let's move on to some questions from some other people. So we got a question from Trevor Adams. Question: is there something intrinsic to the biological stuff we are made out of that necessitates death?
Oh, okay. Well, there is something about biology that necessitates death, but it is not because of the stuff we're made of. It's not the biological stuff.
I saw some studies. I saw something recently that said that like they're testing on some type of animal de-aging. Like, couldn't that be a possibility where it's, instead of growing older, we just stay the same age?
So there are some animals that don't grow older. And the whole issue of aging um, is a natural process in most animals, but there are many living organisms that don't age, including bacteria, for example, and many plants, and even some animals. Lobsters don't age. they,
Really?
uh, they they keep growing. Yeah, you at Woods Hole Observatory. There's a lobster nailed to a wall of a shack outside, which is about, I think, 30 feet long or something. Somebody caught it. It's huge, and aging is a process, is a biochemical process. Sometimes some part of it, it's very complicated. Part of it is just the accumulation of errors in various places, which are not repaired on purpose. And then there are actual reasons that cells die. I mean, there are biochemical uh, processes. One is called apoptosis, which actually kills the cell. So there, in that sense, their aging and death are built in the evolutionary framework to life. And the reason is that if there were no death among organisms, the only way you could do that, you could sustain that, would be if you did not reproduce, because by reproduction without death, you would eventually end up with an overpopulation of whatever species you're talking about, and that leads to not just death but extinction. So death is sort of required in that case. So what about if you didn't reproduce? If you just had an immortal, not growing, not reproducing organism? Yes, that's theoretically possible, and it may be that in fact there were such organisms on the planet, maybe at the beginning or maybe elsewhere, if life exists elsewhere. So it's not impossible to do that, but on this planet, because of some very complex reasons, which there isn't time to go into. But we've had this very strong evolutionary pressure because of the way the Earth changes. Um, and that has led to uh, survival of the most fit uh, species, of the most fit individuals within a population. And that tends to be those individuals that die and reproduce and allow for more evolution to occur and improvements. So if you didn't have death, you could not have, for example, you could not have evolution because you wouldn't have any reproduction. So, it what it would mean is if there were a planet where you had life that didn't die, it would probably be single cells that just nothing ever happened. They would just keep consuming energy and doing whatever metabolism they did forever, not divide, not reproduce, not die. And that's possible. It may actually be something that's common in the rest of the universe, but not here.
All right, we've got a question from Maverick Christian. We're talking about angels and demons a lot today. Why the uncertainty over the existence of demons when the Gospels seem to clearly imply their existence? Jesus' exorcisms.
Yeah, well, clearly, uh, as I said before, the demons are all over the Gospels, and Jesus clearly, dealt with them in a very clear way. So why don't I believe that that's true? Well, I think that, like many things in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, but to some extent also in the New Testament, um, Jesus
Oh, by the
was.
way, let me just mention this really quickly. There's some like clicking going on. Are you clicking a pin?
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, I got it.
Yeah,
Gone.
someone mentioned in the live chat, and I just heard it, so I wanted to make sure.
Sorry about that. Um, yeah. The Okay. So my view of the Gospels is that when Jesus Christ came to Earth, he needed to communicate with the people of the time. And if he had said to them, well, you're acting this way because of a malfunction of your conscious brain, you have a mental illness, etc. All the things we now think of when we see somebody behaving as if they're demon possessed, nobody would have had a clue what he was talking about. So instead, demons were considered real by everyone. And what Jesus did was, when he exorcised a demon, he cured the person the way he cured leprosy or the way he cured blindness. So it was still a miracle because he cured a disease. Now, whether he actually cast a real demon out, or whether he cured a disease is something that I don't know, as I've already said. But I don't think it's impossible to come up with a conclusion that, just as he told parables that made sense to the people listening, he also did things that made sense to the people who were there at the time. And one of the things that I think is really important, and this goes into theology a little bit, so I have to apologize, but I find it fascinating that Jesus talked a lot about how people should act towards each other, how they should behave, how they should worship God. He never said one word about scientific reality of the universe. And why not? And I think that was not his mission on Earth. That's up to us. We have to understand how this planet and how this universe works. And he gave us the hard stuff, how we should treat people and how we should act. The science is
All right.
easy.
I wanted to provide a little bit of pushback because there is one account where Jesus casts the demons out and then sends them into a group of like pigs. And so,
Right.
what would the explanation there be if demons weren't going into the pigs, sending them over the cliff? Would it just be that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, remember, these are stories told by the apostles, and who knows? I mean, that may have been what they witnessed, or it may have been partly what they witnessed. I mean, I'm not saying that the Bible is wrong. I'm saying that we have to interpret it in ways that make sense to us, just as the people at the time interpreted what they saw as ways that made sense to them. I'm sure if Jesus arrived today, or let's say if Jesus arrived in the 1900s, everything would be about machines. If he arrived today, it would all be about software and computers. So it's the cultural language changes as our historical perceptions change. So I mean, I'm not saying that there were not demons that went into pigs. Perhaps there were, but I have no idea.
All right, let's move on to a question from Cliff Wilson, and I don't know how serious this is. He says, I don't really understand it. He says, how was Woodstock? Couldn't resist.
I wrote somewhere that I had been at. Oh yeah, I remember. Somebody said, what was the best concert you ever went to? No, it said something like date yourself by telling us a concert you went. So I said Woodstock. I went to Woodstock in 1969. Yes. How was it? It was unique. Very crowded, very peaceful. All of that was true. Lots of love and cooperation. It was a difficult time because the weather was horrendous. It kept raining, and not all of that is shown in the movie. But we all helped each other out, and it was groovy, man. What can I say?
All right. Here's a question from Richard Mitchell, and we've got another about 15 minutes or so for questions. So if you've got a question, now is the time to send it in. We've only got a few more minutes left with Dr. Garte. All right. Richard says, what do you think, or do you think that we will find a naturalistic explanation for the origin of life?
Yeah, that's a great question. You can look at my tweet today. I tweeted, I believe that God is the creator of life, like everything else, but I'd like to know how he did it. And so I have published the 2 papers in the area, not breakthrough papers, not top level by any means, but I know the literature. I'm following it very carefully. I think that we may find a naturalistic explanation for the origin of life, but not following the path that we're now following. We need to bring in some new ideas, some new paradigms as to how life began, things that have been excluded by biologists who are, as I've said many times, the most atheistic community of scientists. So we need to bring back teleology, we need to bring back agency, and maybe even some form of vitalism if we're going to really crack this very, very difficult problem of the origin of life. And I think if we do that, we may have a shot. And this is a great example of supernatural turning into natural, because at this point, all of those things are forbidden because they smack of metaphysics and not science. But if we bring those things back and we work really hard on it, we may find we may make some progress. And my prediction is that when we do that, we will have more pointers to the reality of God as the creator of everything, including life.
So Kevin O'Connor, he's been sending in a lot of questions, and he's got one on DNA. He says in information, Dr. Garte, a question about why you think that DNA is information. DNA is a chain of molecules, same as any chain of molecules. Do you consider all molecules info?
No, and I have a lot to say about this, and I don't really want to have to say it more than now because I've been saying it a lot. There's this myth among atheists, and I should say that it is not shared by atheist scientists. And if you really want to get a good answer, go to John Perry channel, who has interviewed Richard Dawkins about this crazy idea that genetic code is not a real code, that DNA has no information. And Richard Dawkins, who is a scientist and a biologist, clearly stated that that's nonsense. I've had some interactions with Stephen Woodford, who also said something like this, and Woodford also understood that he was getting some of the information wrong. The DNA sequence is determined by our evolutionary history. The code is constant. It's like a language. Everybody in America speaks the same language, although we all use different words. That is true for the genetic code as well. No, not all molecules have information, but DNA absolutely carries information. What can I say? Go to any biochemistry textbook and look it up. It's all there. And this idea that DNA is not a language, is not a code, that it has no information, is very interesting to me because it shows that atheism is on the decline, because it's now the atheists who are denying science. And this is one of the best examples. So, Kevin, I strongly suggest you do a little bit more research. Don't listen to what some of these people are saying. None of them are scientists. I had a debate on Modern Day Debate a few years ago with name just went out of my head. A scientist who agreed right away that, of course, DNA is a code, and then talked about why that doesn't prove that there's a God, which I agree. I mean, but you don't attack the first premise of saying that there is a natural code in life, and therefore God created life. You can attack the second premise, but you can't attack the first, because that's a scientific fact. And I'm getting a little impatient with that same nonsense being brought up all the time. It's simply untrue. And I wish atheists, and some of them are beginning, John Perry understands this. Richard Dawkins, of course, understands it. And so do all, biologists, whether they're atheists or not, realize that this is just nonsense. And so if any other atheists are listening to me, please, you may have some good arguments against the existence of God. The DNA, not information, is not one of them. I really suggest you drop it. Was that clear? I see you smiling.
Okay,
well, I'm a biochemist. I'm a molecular biologist. This makes me crazy when I see this.
Yeah. All right, 2 more questions, and I think we'll close it out. So from Rebecca Delgado, hi, Dr. Garte. I was recently asked if we don't come from monkeys, why do we have tailbones?
But wait a minute. If we don't come from monkeys,
Yeah.
well, so I'm not sure what she's asking me. Are you asking me why do we have tailbones? I think we do come from primates. I mean, some people say it's monkeys. My phylogenetics is probably not up to speed, but we come from primates where monkeys also came from. We don't come from modern monkeys. We come from ancient monkeys. Now, when I say come from here, I have to be very careful because I believe that human beings are part of the evolutionary pathway and that we did evolve eventually from primates, but that's our bodies. I don't think that evolution explains what it means to be a human. I don't think it has anything to say about our nature, our soul, our incredible abilities and creativities that don't exist anywhere else in the animal kingdom. I don't think any other monkeys or chimps or any other kinds of primates are doing Q&As on YouTube or whatever this channel is. So, there are things that we do that nothing else comes close to doing, including just speaking. So, people ask me about evolution and humans, and I have to always give this response that it explains our bodies. It does not explain everything else about us, which is really what's important.
All right, we had a super chat just come in from John Rousis. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thanks for your super chat. How do you explain that a biting insect would go so far as to imitate the small membranes of leaves, knowing that they do not confer any evolutionary advantage over a simple leaf without small details?
Whoa. How do you explain, so far as to, I don't know what he means by imitate the small membranes of leaves. You mean look like?
Yeah, they look very closely to. I think his question is basically, why do these biting insects have so much detail that they imitate leaves to such a high degree of detail when they didn't need that to be evolutionary advantageous? They just needed to look roughly like a leaf.
Okay, well, so evolution is there's a little bit of a misunderstanding here on how evolution works. Yes, there's a lot of evolutionary advantage and adaptationism, which is part of evolution, but it's not the whole story. So there are many examples. I mean, millions of examples, and Stephen Jay Gould wrote about this extensively in some of his books. Examples of things that don't make sense from an evolutionary adaptationist or selective advantage point of view. And that's because there are many mechanisms for evolutionary change, including neutral drift and other mechanisms, which are molecular mechanisms that are quite complicated, that result in change. And sometimes it's just accidental that a particular type of allele survives versus others, and that's what gets fixed in the population, or at least a population. And that's what you see, and you get that result. So it's not necessary to come up with an absolutely adaptationist answer for every feature of every organism. That's not what modern evolutionary theory says. Neutral evolution can come up with stuff that even seems counter to selective advantage. And there's a lot of that in the evolution of humans. There's a lot of things about us that don't seem to make sense from an evolutionary point of view. But in other animals, that can also be the case. So it's not a problem.
All right, one more question and then we'll close it out. So from Science Behind the Bible, as a scientist, do you ever feel scared to share your belief in God?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think. Well, I certainly don't now because I'm retired, and I don't care what I can't get fired, and nobody has any effect on my career. When I first became a Christian, I did not speak about it for a number of reasons. One was not so much scared, but a little uncomfortable. The academic and I was also in the government world of science at NIH, and that world and the academic world is not friendly towards religion, although there are many religious people in it, but they tend to keep quiet. It's not a world where a lot of religious or spiritual ideas are discussed very often, although they can be, if you're having a beer at a meeting or something. But in normal everyday converse, it's not done. So I felt a bit uncomfortable talking about it. But I know that there are people especially in certain academic settings in some places, who perhaps are a little less comfortable even than I was, and maybe get to the point of being scared a bit. I think the academic environment these days is different from the one that I grew up in. It seems to be very divisive, and I don't really know because I'm not in it. But it's possible that some people, did feel scared. I never really did, and of course, because I came to faith fairly late in my life and fairly late in my career. So, and also the other thing was, when I first came to faith, I was not a member of a church. I didn't know what to do about it. I kept it very quiet, even to myself. I mean, I prayed, I thought about God, but I didn't have anybody I was talking to about it. Most of my friends were atheists. So yeah, it was unusual.
Well, Dr. Garte, is there anything that you would like to leave with the audience as we close out today?
Well, what I always like to close with, whenever you ask me that or anyone else, I like to say that the key message that I'm trying to give in my writing, in my interviews, whatever I do, is, and I'm not alone, there's a large army of people doing this now, is to convince the world that especially young people or people of faith who are feeling pressure to leave their faith because of the force of new atheism, and because the feeling that somehow it doesn't go along with science, that should be resisted, because there is no incompatibility between science and faith, despite what you're being told. And it's certainly possible, and in fact useful, to be a person of Christian faith who's also a scientist or someone who loves science. There's no contradictions at all involved. And when you hear those, you should understand that they are religious in nature. In other words, atheistic in nature. And I do call atheism a religion, and I will argue with anyone about that. The myth that it simply means I don't have enough evidence to believe in God, as we've heard from some of them, is just nonsense. It's a strong and proselytizing religion which has taken over many things, and I'm part of the struggle to prevent it from taking over science.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thanks so much for coming on, Dr. Garte. It's been great to have you, and we'll be on the lookout to see if that interview surpasses 1 million views. I think it will. Just judging on how many, I think this month alone it's received 160,000.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
It's a matter of time, I think. It's a matter of time.
Well, we did another one, so that might be coming out in a year or so.
Yeah, we did another one, and we also you were at CCV2, so we've got your lecture that you gave there. So we'll have that up on the channel as well. So yeah, all right. Well, thanks for joining me today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out. Third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting this ministry and becoming a patron. Links to that are in the description. Oh, and have I mentioned that Christianity is true?